Hello and welcome to Ukraine Today. I'm Volodymyr Omelyan. Just a few weeks ago, the Ukrainian Parliament approved the appointment of the new cabinet ministers of Ukraine. And joining me now to discuss the plans of one of the most hopeful ministries in the current cabinet is the Minister for Infrastructure, Mr. Volodymyr Omelyan. Mr. Omelyan, welcome to Ukraine Today.
Thank you a lot.
So, Mr. Omelyan, you are not new to the ministry. You served as the deputy to the previous minister, Pivovarsky, and you already announced that you'll be continuing the reforms which have been started by Minister Pivovarsky. So, what are your main areas which you'll be focusing right now?
Unfortunately, not beloved trend of being technocrat. I'm a bureaucrat, served for the country for last 17 years here in Ukraine. Plans are the same. There is no dramatical change. I will go on with reform of Pivovarsky launched last year, but definitely there will be key priorities for my team. Our goals are following. It's corporatization of Ukrainian railways and Ukrainian Post, deep reform and comprehensive reform of maritime strategy of Ukraine, seaports, administration of seaports. Second issue is privatization. And third, but I would say it's also top one, it's fighting corruption.
What are the key assets which you hope to be privatized in the nearest future?
I would say the most prominent ones are seaports. We would like to have them privatized or being in concession. With this goal, we are developing right now and drafting new law on concession to develop brand new mechanism, transparent, very easy to implement, and for investors not to open Ukraine and to discover all difficulties, but to be in very comfortable surrounding. This is our goal number one. And I think that we will proceed with Port Oktyabrsk like a model one. This port should be renamed according to decommunization of Ukraine. So it could be a good challenge for both, for rename of the port and for concession of the port.
Mr. Omelyan, one of the key challenges for the previous minister, Minister Pivovarsky, to go forward with the reforms was the lack of cooperation with the parliament. Basically, and it was true for many other ministries we spoke to. Basically, what was happening is that the ministry was coming up with some groundbreaking reform, but to go forward, they needed the support of the parliament because changes to the legislation were required. How do you plan, and the parliament wasn't cooperating, so how do you plan to work with the parliament? How do you plan to make sure that you have enough votes in the parliament to pass the legislation which is necessary for your reforms?
I was appointed by the parliament with a majority of votes. Definitely I will try to keep the same number of votes in support of all reforms implemented or developed by the Ministry of Infrastructure. This is my task number one. In order to achieve this, I hope as soon as I have a new team by me, officially approved by the Cabinet of Ministers, I will relocate myself to the Parliament. And I'm ready to spend there as many hours and days and nights as it is needed, just to convince each MP to vote for the reform, to vote for new legislation, to vote for transparency and efficiency of state mechanism.
So basically, you plan to focus on lobbying the necessary laws within the parliament?
Lobbying in positive sense of this word.
In the public, absolutely. Mr. Omelyan, just again, very recently, actually at the first meeting of the Cabinet of Ministers, one of the key posts which is reporting to your ministry, the CEO of Ukrainian Railways, was appointed a Polish crisis manager, Mr. Balchun. How hopeful are you that Mr. Balchun will be able to grasp the realities of Ukraine's politics, of Ukraine's bureaucracy, and the way of doing business in Ukraine soon enough to go forward with reforming the Ukrainian railways?
I would say that appointment of Mr. Balchun as CEO of Ukrainian Railways and Mr. Igor Smolyansky as CEO of Ukrainian Post, it's a great victory for Ukraine. It never happened before. Normal procedure was to appoint a friend of yours or some kind of frontman to run business as usual. I do believe that there is enough strength inside of Mr. Balchun and inside of Mr. Smolyansky to implement the reform. I'm sure that Balchun knows everything. He was in same situation Poland 10 years ago, or even more. He did it successfully once, so he should simply repeat his success. I even joked during the nomination committee when we were selecting him what kind of music he's going to play after he completes successful reform in Ukraine.
But there are some of the experts that say that in order for Mr. Balchun to get into the realities of Ukraine's railways, it'll take him at least half a year. Does he have that much time, or do you think that it'll happen faster?
I think corruption is the same everywhere. I would say that this 6 months for Mr. Balchun to get into the business, it's the estimation of his enemies, not his estimations. I think he will handle it much faster, up to 1 month or up to 2 months, and he works right away. He already studies all financial documents and everything about Ukrainian railways, so he's keen and motivated to overcome this challenge. And I do believe that we will see the real change of Ukrainian railways. It's impossible to do overnight, but still it's possible to do within 1 or 2 years.
One of the other areas which Mr. Pivovarsky was trying to reform, and which you already said that you'll be following up on, that is the open skies agreement between Ukraine and the EU. During the very first interview we had with Mr. Pivovarsky, he said, which was more than a year ago, he said that Ukraine is hoping that the EU will sign this agreement, yet we're now in mid of spring of 2016. This still hasn't happened. You announced that you'll be pushing for this, that you hope that EU will sign this agreement around July of 2016. So what is really happening with this process?
You know, my biggest hope is that Europeans will not make this open skies treaty like communism for Soviet people that never comes. I think that we will have it signed this year because it's a real crucial moment for each Ukrainian citizen. As far as you can have free visa regime, but if you don't have availability to fly for cheap, if you cannot access any European city only by car or by rails, it's not comfortable. And I think that having this agreement signed, we will make a tremendous breakthrough. Actually, what we did with the United States, it was done within a couple of months, and we started from the very beginning and ended by concluding this agreement in July last year, and it entered into force November 2015, so pretty fast.
But still, we don't have any U.S. airlines having direct flights to Ukraine.
You know, they are coming, and I do believe that they will come this year, maximum next year. But let us sign first agreement with the European Union. We are still waiting for them.
The same long time, a lot of time too for them, for the cheap European locals to come into Ukraine?
We go ahead. We've got very active CEO of Lviv Airport, and I do believe she will make a change and she will get some low cost to Ukraine. Let us start with Lviv. And then I hope as soon as we have this agreement signed, we will cover it with the whole Ukraine.
What about the bilateral agreements? Wouldn't it be easier to sign bilateral agreements between Ukraine and particular countries? We don't need all 27 countries. I would assume that it's 5, max 10 countries which have core low-cost airlines headquartered in them in order to make these flights easier.
We try to do it both ways, but you know, it's a political commitment of Brussels, and they simply should fulfill it. That's it. We agreed about it long ago, and there is only one signature left to have it implemented.
Mr. Omelyan, and my final question is about, again, a very problematic area under your ministry, the roads in Ukraine. This is something which has been a problem for many years. Many ministers and prime ministers were promising to improve the roads, yet it seems to be that the budget always lacks costs for that. What are you planning to do to change this situation? Because again, there are reports which say that the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian budget spends more on repairing the roads than it could have spent once for renovating them altogether.
I'm very happy that my first meeting with the Prime Minister started with issue of roads. and there is a great focus of him aimed at this special area. I do believe that we will invest more into roads reconstruction in Ukraine this year, but definitely it's also up to the Parliament and my ability to communicate with Parliament successfully to convince them to sign a road trust fund for Ukraine, to have all tax and fines specially concentrated in this fund to spend them for road reconstruction and building new roads. There is only way out to improve radically the situation.
Who will be managing this fund once it's created?
It will be managed by state, and it will be managed by Ukravtodor, but we have to develop a very transparent mechanism just to avoid any misuse of money and any accusation of corruption in this regard.
But by the state and Ukravtodor, do you mean that your ministry will be in charge, the Ministry of Finance?
Our goal is to have Ukravtodor operating those money, to announce and to convene transparent tender process, and then it's up for business to win the tender and to build new roads.
Understood. Well, it looks like some big challenges ahead of you, Mr. Omelyan. We can wish you only best of luck, and thank you very much for finding the time to come and talk to us. We were discussing the main strategies for the new Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine, Mr. Volodymyr Omelyan. I'm Volodymyr Omelyan. Thank you for watching Ukraine Today.